Hey guys, this is Philip again. Today I will be going over another build, the AOE Hybrid Sorcerer. This build is designed to immobilize large groups of enemy combatants and provide general area damage to the battlefield. The primary uses for this build include pushing the front line by denial of area attacks, dropping AOE while retreating to slow enemy movement and buy allied movements more time to escape, and holding or bursting through a choke point such as a mile gate or a defensive breach. This build has grown in strength since the release of Imperial City as a result of ZOS pushing for more diversity in build setups. This is evident by the number of craftable hybrid sets that have been released with each major patch. In addition, the removal of AoE caps in the new Dragon Bones update will see a sharp rise in the effective damage that this build can do. The build's key objective is to maintain a continuous barrage. It does this by focusing primarily on having an excess of recovery in both magic and stamina. Although specific armor configurations will affect the exact number of both magic and stamina recovery, there is typically over 2k in both fields. The key notable exception to this is with the Shackle Breaker's Aptitude configuration that I'll be showing you later. Health in a PvP environment is typically between 17 and 20k of health, but it can vary based on the armor configuration. The attribute points, as you can see, are divided with 31 points being applied to magic, 2 points being applied to health, and 31 points being applied to stamina. Weapon, spell damage, critical damage, and resistance are subject to change based on the armor configuration. Now, typically, in this instance, this build assumes that you have the maximum amount of champion points allowed. The point allocation is essentially broken down into the following. For the green constellations, it is 30 points in Siphonet, 100 points in Mooncalf, which increases your stamina recovery, and 100 points in Arcanus, which increases your magic recovery. Now, the green constellation is by far the most important constellations for this particular build, as they deal with recovery in general. In the blue constellation, I have 100 points in Elemental Expert, which increases your Flame, Frost, Shock, and Magic damage by 15%. In the Ritual, I have 100 points in Mighty, which increases your physical, poison, and disease damage done by 15%, and 30 points in Thaumaturge, which increases your damage done with damage to over time effects by 12 points of 8. Now, as time progresses, more points will of course go into this particular field, but for the time being, that's how I have it set. And in the red constellations, I have 100 points in the medium armor focus, which increases my physical resistance by 5280 while wearing 5-piece or more of medium armor, and 100 points into Ironclad, which reduces the damage taken against directed damage attacks by 25%, and 30 points into Resistance, which increases your critical resistance, and in this case by 844. Now, the most important thing about the constellations, as I mentioned before, was green as a result of it being a recovery. You do want to take note that all of the numbers that I'm referencing, such as the 2k for the magic and stamina recovery, are subject to change depending on what race you choose. In this case, I'm using Red Guard. In addition, all of the 5-piece sets that I'm showing will have the weapon as the 5th piece, and the build itself utilizes both the bow and lightning staff as the primary weapons. Now, while there are several armor configurations for this build to use or utilize, I'm covering 4 specifically. The armor set, all of the armor sets are in medium, and the first one is called, I call it Tava's Path. It essentially consists of 3-piece Willow's Path, 5-piece Tava's Favor, and 3-piece Marksman. And while it's worn, the magic recovery for this setup is 2215, and the stamina recovery is at 2299, with the spell damage being 1415 and the weapon damage being 1851. As a side note, I typically utilize the multi-effect enchantment, which I and prefer it on the armors, but you can always substitute that with half of them being magic, half of them being stamina, or full health if you're wanting more staying power in a fight. The weapons do have a weapon damage enchantment on them, although that's mainly as a backup if you run out of poisons, which I'll get to later. Now, the next setup that I'm showing you, for armor setup that I'm showing you, is Tava's Infernal Path. It essentially swaps out the two of the pieces for the Willows Path with Infernal Guardians, and basically turning your shield skills into weapons, or into an attack skill half the time. Now you will lose, of course, because you're swapping out those two pieces for Willow's Path. It will drop your magic and stamina recovery to 2053 and 2103 respectively. And the traits, as you've seen for the Infernal Guardian, are transmuted to Divines. Yeah. Now the next one I call is the Moloch's Path of Aptitude. This setup adds a one-piece Molochina helmet while returning the shoulder for the Willow's Path, so you get the two-piece bonus for it. Additionally, the five-piece Tava's Favor is replaced with the five-piece Penella's Aptitude, while retaining the three-piece Marksman on accessories. This boosts your magic and stamina recovery back to 2215 and 2103, respectively. In addition, your weapon and spell damage are now boosted to 2332, and they're both equalized as a result of Penella's Aptitude. Now, the final setup that I'm going to show you for the armor setup, I call it the Shackle Breaker's Aptitude. It didn't work quite as well. Give me one moment. This one utilizes, of course, the Molochina one piece to increase the weapon and spell damage. In this time, rather than having the Willow's Path, it swaps out with Shackle Breaker, two-piece for the shoulder and the chest. In addition, it does, of course, keep the Penella's Aptitude to equalize out any damage that it gets. But this time around, it swaps out the accessories from Marksman's to Draw King Slayer, three-piece. Now, what you'll notice with this setup, specifically, is that it abandons the 2k recovery minimum in order to increase the weapon and spell damage further in this regards. In fact, if you look at it, you'll see that the magic recovery drops to 1420 and stamina recovery drops to 1726, but the spell damage and weapon damage skyrocket to 3390. Now, if you were to swap out to your Storm Calling and take Power Surge over Empowered Ward, you'll see your weapon and spell damage spike to 4k and roughly 4k on your bow. Now, the primary food that's used here is the Honest Lassie honey tea, which increases your magic and stamina recovery by 493 for an hour. Right here. If you're wondering why I'm using this particular drink as opposed to an epic level food, it's typically because the epic level food that does something similar to this also grants health recovery, but that comes with the downside of reduced magic and stamina recovery overall. so it's not giving you back as much magic or stamina recovery in that regards. Now, for the skill layout, each of the skills are essentially divided into a stamina or magic bar. The only exception being Streak, which is your primary survival skill. Your stamina bar consists of Arrow Barrage, Bombard, Razor Caltrops, Dark Conversion, Streak, and Suppression Field as your ultimate. And your magic bar consists of Restraining Prison, Lightning Flood, Blockade of Storms, Empowered Ward, Streak, and Thunderous Rage. If you're wondering why I'm using Thunderous Rage over Eye of Storm, it's because this build is primarily set to attack at range. The only reason you're really moving up is to push the front line, but that's again only for a few seconds. You're not going to be staying there too long. Now, for both bars, the setup is essentially 3 attack skills. The secondary survival skill, in this case, on magic, it's going to be your Empowered Ward, and on your stamina, it's going to be your conversion, which heals you and grants you magic back. And the primary survival skill, which is Streak, is essentially used. You can use it to port in, drop AOE, and then port back out from the front line. And of course you have the ult depending on which bar you're on. Now the rotation typically depends on the resource pool, whichever one has more to draw from. Usually the stamina bar is the first to be utilized, and it starts with Razor Caltrops. It usually starts here with Razor Caltrops, right here. Then Arrow Barrage, followed by Bombard if the enemy is close enough to be hit. When the stamina bar is depleted, you can switch to your magic bar to cast Elemental Blockade, or in this case, Blockade of Storms as the morph since you're using the Lightning Staff, Lightning Flood, and Restraining Prison if the enemy is close enough to be snared. And if you're using the Tava's Infernal Path armor setup that I mentioned earlier, you can then utilize Empowered Ward to proc the triple mortar that it fires, essentially making it as the 4th attack skill on your bard, plus defense. The rotation in some ways also depends on your scenario. Like, for example, if a loose collection of enemy players is charging a position, you might consider casting Razor Caltrops, Arrow Barrage, and Lightning Flood while retreating. So, for example, you might say, while they're coming, you would say, out. And you're doing all of that while you're retreating. Now, in this regards, if you're fighting, for example, an organized bulk group, which is charging your position, and you're not the only allied player there, there might be 5 to 10 others, you might consider stepping 45 to 90 degrees off their path, off the path that they're traveling, and rotate between magic and stamina while using Bombard and Restraining Prison as they pass. The ball group essentially has to decide either to go for a single player who's firing at them from the side off of their path, or go for the entire group of players, which provides more AP. And usually they would go for more AP over a single player. Now, if the ball group is stationary, of course, like they're waiting, for example, for their ult to charge, you and your team is gaining on their position, but you're already at that position, you can essentially drop Suppression Field, and then use Restraining Prison and Bombard before they can complete their charge. Essentially, the more of them that you're able to slow or immobilize, the less effective their ult bomb will be. And of course, if the enemy is trying to force their way through a choke point, you can drop all of your skills at that point and then rotate Restraining Prison and Bombard as they try to come through. Now, as far as poisons, I do prefer the Escapist Poison. This poison essentially mobilizes your target and grants you unstoppable, rendering you immune to control effects for about 1 to 2 seconds. The poison will also break you free of ongoing control effects. It also inflicts hindrance to your target and grants you major expedition, reducing their movement speed by 50 and increasing yours by 30% for 2.3 seconds. And finally, it drains their stamina from your target and increases the cost of their stamina abilities by 30%, while restoring stamina, 238 stamina per second to you. Now, the key important thing about this these poisons is that because they don't just proc on when the skill goes off. For AOE, they proc on each tick of damage that goes off. So this means if you're throwing out tons and tons of AOE and they hit a large group, it's almost a guarantee that you're going to get a proc for your poison every 10 seconds, which is the cooldown time for it. So essentially, every couple of seconds, every 10 seconds or so, you'll become immune to, it'll break you free of control effects every 10 seconds, making you immune to to any control effects for 1.6, etc. at that point. Now, in conclusion, if you're wanting to see this build in action, I have provided a link to one of my streams that showcases this particular build. And the link is in the description below. And please feel free to like and subscribe to my video. And thanks for watching my channel.